wonderful Sue from Camden Council and Transition Town Brixton, Debbie from Transition Kentish Town, and Anna from the Centre for Alternative Technology will be running this Skillshare on how to work effectively with your local council. So this will be an interactive session with some group work. So we encourage you to keep your camera on. However, we will be recording this session, so feel free to turn it off if that makes you feel uncomfortable. So I would like now to pass over to Sue and Debbie.
Hi everyone, I'm Debbie from Transition Kentish Town, and Sue from Camden Council and also Transition Brixton, very lucky. And I just want to tell you a little bit about our journey to how I started to work with the council, with our transition group, and how far we've got. And it's going really well and it's really good fun. So can I have the first slide please? Is Carlos here from the Sustainability Department, Camden Council? Anyway, if Carlos here, perhaps you can wave. Basically, our relationship with the council started, we've been going about 10 years. We started to send out regular newsletters. We noticed that quite a lot of people from different council offices were signing up. Then a few years ago, when the Demand film came out, sorry about the quality of the slides, by the way, everyone. We had the session on schools, and we decided to invite the cabinet member for schools, Camden Council, Angela Mason, as a keynote listener, which we know a lot of transition groups do, invite councillors to be listeners. And at that event, we came up with the idea of setting up a group called the Sustainers, which is all about mobilising students at schools to self-determine the sort of projects they want to work on. And instead of being told, all you need to do is a sustainability project on recycling, to say to the kids, hey, what do you want to do? You're in charge. You tell the council what you want. And this sort of took off. So I was introduced to Carlos in the Sustainability Department, and we formed a plan. We decided to pilot it with secondary schools, which is something I'm really interested in, because there's a lot of work us transition groups around the country do with primary schools, but the secondary schools are really hard to motivate. But this whole narrative of you choose, it's self-determination, you're in charge here, you tell the council what you want, seemed to strike a chord. So Carlos and I did some graphics and posters. Next slide, please. Can you see the Camden logo at the bottom there? So just back very quickly with the transition logo. So the partnership, a genuine collaboration was formed. Next slide, please. We can share all this afterwards. Rob came down. We had a big summit at Camden Council HQ. We had about 80 kids there. We piloted it with 6 schools. Big plan. You obviously can't take all that in now. And Rob came and did a great talk, and the kids got really excited. Carlos had a great idea a couple of months later to follow up with something called a Dragon's Den. Carlos got some businesses from the council's Climate Change Alliance involved, the business alliance part of the Camden Council, and they put some money in, and the schools they had to come and present a project, and they got given 500 quid or something each to go off and do their project. So it was all going really well, our schools engagement, really, starting to get in there. The students felt really empowered by it. And then, of course, COVID came. So, we've had to put the school stuff slightly on hold. But Carlos has had the idea of we're going to do a schools climate charter, which we're going to be launching in April. And the teachers are slowly getting back on board. And, there's a lot of excitement. Obviously, the school strikes before COVID helped. So schools is a great way to work with your council on. And interesting enough, every council will be different. We don't work with the schools department. The schools department goes through Camden Learning. We work with the sustainability department on schools. Next slide, please. Then another project. 2 years ago, Camden announced a climate and ecological emergency, had a citizens' assembly. One of the outcomes was, hey, let's work with community. Let's have the council want to generally collaborate with community. So Georgia Gould, head of Camden Council, gave us a shop in Kentish Town and said, you've got it for 6 weeks, off you go. So this is where Sue, who's going to talk in a minute, this is where I met Sue. Carlos from the council and Sue did a lot of the planning with some of our other groups, and the name Think and Do was born. And Think and Do is basically the network name for anyone in our borough who's getting involved in climate or social action. So many different groups came together, because instead of just a transition group, you're stronger if you align yourself with other groups and the council and form an ecosystem. So one of the really interesting outcomes of our pop-up shop was the relationship with the council developed, because I don't know why, but for some reason there had to be 2 council officers at the shop at any one point. And what was really interesting is all different officers from different departments came along and they all met each other. I heard conversations like, hi, I'm transport, I'm housing, blah, blah, blah. And it's almost as if the council officers released from the chains of their desk sort of thought differently about their job. They had fun. It was bloody freezing cold. Everyone bonded, and it was really hilarious. There were different things like Solar Together, renewable energy team having a meeting there whilst the laughter yoga workshop was going on. Then a bike workshop came along, and the transport department having a very serious meeting, and the transport department like, we can't have a meeting whilst you've got bike, and we're like, yeah, you can. And it was just really shaking up perception of what's possible. In this picture here, there's at the top, you can see there's Sue in the left, there's Rob Hopkins, and there's Georgia Gould, head of the council, and I hope you can see the dinosaurs. That's what I mean, you mix it up, you have fun. It was a brilliant night, that. Next slide, please. Another outcome of our pop-up shop, with our burgeoning relationship with the councils, we launched some projects because the shop was only 6 weeks. So obviously we wanted this to continue. So it was sort of, what if we created a Camden forest? Really interesting project I'm going to tell you more about in a minute. And it's a bit of a ruse, really. This is TCV, around the country. They give out bare root tree whips. They look like dead sticks in the wintertime. I'm a gardener. But so we thought, what if we could create a Camden forest, getting free bare root tree whips from TCV? But instead of it just being a tree giveaway, what if we could create a Camden forest? What if we could plant 2,000 of these and 25 of these trees by 2025 in people's back gardens, on housing estates, etc. But what if we could encourage people to become story tree guardians? So we put a kind of different narrative into it. You get people to take not only ownership of the tree, but share their stories of how their tree and how their relationship with nature's growing. And this project has been brilliant. Even during lockdown, we've been able to do the odd sort of tree giveaway. We formed a group called the Recyclists with the council, where a lot of people in the borough, well, a few, who cycle around were dropping off trees to people. The next project, what if we created a library of things? I don't know if anyone's here from the library of things, but we had this up 2-3 years ago. And now this spring, we have a library of things coming to Kentish Town, which the Sustainability Department, I think, have funded and organised. There's different ways anyone can do a library of things around the country. This model here with the library of things is £30,000. But that includes a local job. But, in Totnes, they've got a share shed. It costs them a few grand to set up. It's all about encouraging a sharing economy throughout the borough. We're now starting to work with the housing department at Camden Council on estates. Next slide, please. Because this Camden Forest project, we thought, well, it's all very well giving trees to people to put in their back gardens, but a lot of people in our borough don't have back gardens. A lot of people live on housing estates. So how can we reach these people in housing estates? Could we get them to grow trees on pots and put the pots on their balconies or walkways? Now, an interesting thing here, the tree department are like, no, tenants are not allowed to plant trees in estates. We know that. Green Spaces department, oh, this is coming through housing department, tenants and residents engagement. It's because there's a whole department within every council, participation, engaging residents. How do we engage residents? Well, if we're offering them trees to grow in a pot, they're connecting with nature. If it's something they want to look after, so the tree department have allowed us to do that. So our Camden Forest project, we're working with Green Spaces, we're working with housing, we're working with trees, we're working with sustainability. 4 departments coming in on this story. And this is a lovely outcome in the last few months. This is a housing, through Sue's going to talk in a minute, through her participation department, we met another council department called Tenants and Residents Engagement. Found out they've got a newsletter which goes out to 20,000 tenants across the borough. We asked if we could have a paragraph in about giving away free trees. Went in their winter newsletter. We've had over 100 inquiries from across the borough, really diverse audience, people saying, I live on the 9th floor of a block, I'd like a tree to grow in a pot. People are starting to talk, more conversations about nature. In next month's newsletter, we've got one going about wildflowers. We're giving out wildflower seeds. So this is 3 or 4 different council departments and us coming together to work on a project. Next slide, please. Some things don't work. We tried with the sustainability department, home energy cafes. We thought we'll do it every month. It's a great thing in lockdown because, renewable energy is sexy, but energy conservation is not quite so how do we engage people with it? We had some online workshops, only about 30 people came. It's a tricky one, but not everything you do works, but it's energy conservation is an important area. Another project, we're still working with the council where we're in talks, easier said than done. We came up with a nifty name. What if we put the park back into parking? The idea is if you give up your car, you're allowed to turn it into a parklet. They've done it in Hackney. They had a mechanism in place. Now the council, they put it on their climate action plan, sustainability department are like, yeah, we're going to do the parklets. Now what's emerged, it's like, well, it's a bit top down. They'll give us the parklets where it suits them. Spoke to the head of sustainability last week and I was like, well, I don't think this is the point. We're meant to be having fun. The climate work we're all doing together should be fun, engaging people. And if you get people to give up their car, they can create a parklet. It's really good fun because what we've realised with our working with the council, it's about engaging people, it's about having fun, but it's enabling council officers to have fun as well. Now, this parklet project's a tricky one because it crosses 6 different council departments. You also get street engineering. I don't even know the names of them, but it is an ongoing thing. We work with the council in a very positive way, and this project I hope will happen. Next slide, please. This is just a bit of a silly thing I did, and it might be a starting point for anyone looking to work with their councils. We did a list of all the kind of projecty things we're working on. And one of them we did this year, I don't know if anyone saw it, was a wrap around our local newspaper, the Camden New Journal. We had 300 entries to a competition, people visioning what the borough would look like once we've addressed climate and social inequality. It was a 4-page wrap around our newspaper. The following project's now called Visioning Camden 2030. Sue here and different council departments have now got excited about it. And we're forming a project to roll out an exhibition, a book. So that's one project, lots of projects there. And on the right-hand side, sustainability, green spaces, housing, participation. I could put transport, I could put other projects there. It's a really interesting thing to do a mind map, to have your projects that you dream of on the left-hand side, the different council departments that could potentially work, and just see where the ecosystem grows. It's really interesting. And in my experience, the different council departments really like to have different ways of looking at their job and being creative. There's one guy, from a different department I spoke to that, was telling me he had his job was really hard. He was dealing a lot with council tenants. And he said a few years ago, we had a show in a housing estate and we ran an opera and people leaned on their balcony and watched it. And when this guy was telling me the story, his eyes lit up. And it was a big light bulb moment for me, because I realised to get officers like him involved, you've got to make it fun, you've got to make it creative, you've got to go to them with a can-do, what-if project. Last slide, please. Sorry, I'm rattling on through this. So basically, here are 8 ideas of projects you can crack on with your council on Monday. I mean, perhaps we can come back to this, maybe take a screenshot. I'm happy for anyone to get in touch with me and I'll give you all the resources for all the ways we're starting to work with our council, on these projects, some of which I've discussed now, some I haven't. Sue, anything from you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult to follow that, Debbie, but just to say that from Camden's point of view, Camden Council is actively looking to share power at the moment. We're actively looking to build trust and partnerships with community and to share the problems as well, not just the solutions, and to develop solutions together. So Debbie has demonstrated how she, has become like a really active, trusted partner, not just her, there's a whole lots of it. The Sustainers was the start for the Transition Kentish Town. But then when I was tasked with setting up Think and Do, I knew that there was Transition Kentish Town, but also quite a lot of other organisations that I could go to and say, right, what are we going to do? And I didn't just say, right, we're setting up a shop. This is a council shop. This is what we're going to do. I said, what are we going to do? Let's do this together. We had to do it really quickly, actually. But sometimes that helps, to embrace that sort of messiness. And we use that imagination platform as well that we've been talking about a lot as part of this conference. The what if, you saw those words in some of the posters and things on the walls. So we didn't, as a council, we didn't go along and say, right, we need to cut carbon by 10% or whatever. We need to, what are we going to do? What can we do? What are you interested in? What are you passionate about? What can you what do you want? You know, what do we need to do to be able to work together? And so I think this whole idea of building a relationship is really important. If I'd have started this conversation from scratch, I might have talked a little bit about lobbying and how to lobby your council. I do still think that's really important. That, you know, you have to. You know, we talk about this a lot. You know, on the one hand, you want to challenge the council to do more. On the other hand, you know, you want to be a partner. You know, how do you balance those two things? But still, I think this whole concept of building a relationship is really important either way, whatever you're doing, and being able to have a conversation and being able to share the problem, not just the solution, and work out solutions together. So that's all I really wanted to say. I think on the Library of Things, I just made a note that, you know, it's so important that that idea came from the community. So the council has funded that now, and they've put it in one of their libraries, but it wasn't an idea that came from a council officer meeting or a councillor meeting. It came from the community. There was genuine evidence demand that it was wanted. And so it was much easier to make it happen, to make that decision about making it happen. So that's all I wanted to talk about. Carlos, did you want to add anything? Carlos works in the sustainability team and, you know, built the relationship in the first place. I've capitalised on it with my Think and Do work.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that I think it all started when we ran our citizens' assembly on the climate crisis, and the council put a lot of effort and resources on getting the people in one room, and you know, all this idea of empowering the community and creating spaces where we can work with the community and collaborate to deliver projects came from that initial meeting or a project, which was a citizen assembly. And then from then, we follow up in another sort of kind of consultation, co-design meeting to work around the Think and Do, which was a big momentum following the assembly. Everyone was energized. Most members of the assembly felt that the council wanted to work with them. So there was a bit of trust building. And then we follow up in this co-design of the Think and Do. And then there was like a magic, because the Think and Do was, as you know, Sue said, was deliver fast, but it was magic. Everyone put a lot of energy, a lot of ideas, a lot of connections, not only professional but personal connections between people who lived in the same city that never knew each other, or council officers working with communities and discovering, the potential and the possibilities, and members of the community being able to talk directly to council officers and different things that they wanted to and never had managed to talk to the right person. So there was a huge kind of explosion of energies and possibilities. Yeah. And then that, ramificating a number of the projects that Debbie just went through. So it's been amazing. And, and from the point of view of the council, we have delivered much more than we could have delivered on our own. And things like, the Think and Do and people in the community like Debbie are now delivering like the vision in Camden 2030. That's basically, we are on the margin supporting. This is all community-led now. So it's a really win-win experience. So it's been really positive. And thank you, Debbie, for your energy and your creativity.
Thank you for your openness, guys. So just before I hand back, just to say, final closing advice is, make it fun, make it creative. You add that into the council offices work. All different departments, they want to do this kind of work. They want to meet each other. They want to have fun. And the other advice is, don't go into the council straight off and go and say, we want this amount of money. That's the old school thinking. I know you want the money, guys, but you'll get it further down the line. Go in with a can-do, creative, fun project. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Debbie and Sue and Carlos, our surprise guests there for you. Yeah, that was a bit of a whirlwind. I feel like I've been swept. Like, whoa. It all sounds brilliant. So now you're going to pass over to Anna Bullen from Centre for Alternative Technology, who's going to tell you about some of the work they've been doing with local councils, which you may have heard a little bit about in some of her Anna has done some talks for us previously as part of the summit. But yeah, so I'll hand over to Anna.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me just a minute. Okay. So, hold on a minute. Let's get this set up. Is that okay? Everyone can see it? Great. Okay. So, yeah, my name's Anna Bullen. I'm from the Centre for Alternative Technology. I'm their Innovation Lab Manager, which is part of the Innovation Lab, is part of the Zero Carbon Britain Hub. Zero Carbon Britain is a long-standing research project. It's been going on for nearly 15 years now within CAT, looking at essentially how can the UK get to net zero. We've done 15 years of research and modelling, hourly modelling over the last 10 years that enabled us to develop a scenario of a zero carbon Britain. Then out of that has come the Zero Carbon Britain Hub and Innovation Lab. We got some funding last year, and essentially that hub exists to support councils, communities and organisations on their journey to net zero. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Innovation Lab today and the work we've been doing with one particular council, or set of councils, sorry, one county. Just quickly, my background is in kind of stakeholder engagement. I've spent 30 years in the sustainability arena, working with different groups of stakeholders to find solutions to address the climate emergency. Very often, very diverse stakeholders. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the importance of that today, how you bring those stakeholders together and why it's so important to have this diverse mix of stakeholders. But very quickly, first, I'm going to talk to you about what an innovation lab is. We've all got a slightly different notion of an innovation lab. When I told my daughter that I'd got a job as an innovation lab manager, she thought I was going to be in a lab with a white coat and lots of test tubes. Well, I'm not. This is a social innovation lab. This is all about developing solutions in a very creative way. And that really is a key kind of fundamental element of it. Innovation labs are co-creative. They're all about collaborative problem solving. They're drawing on the insights and experience of stakeholders in their broadest possible sense. When I talk about experts and stakeholders, that is everyone from your traditional expert through to, you know, our members of the public, people living on the local housing estates who, you know, they are an expert in their own field. We are all experts in our own right. Ideally, in any lab process, we have this, as I said, this diverse spectrum of stakeholders, of people coming from different backgrounds, everything from government through to councils, through to businesses, through to local residents. And actually, the more diverse your group is, your participants are, very often the better solutions you'll come up with, the more creative and innovative it'll be. They're experimental, so they're about a process of experimentation and learning. They're not a one-off thing. They are developing ideas and solutions, trying them out, trying again, rethinking it. And it's an ongoing process. And they're sense-making. Participants come together to understand what's happening and why, and that's really important, is to get that fundamental understanding in place in the first place. And that builds on the sense that change, not only, you know, change is necessary, but also it often creates an openness. You know, what we want is to create an openness to change, an openness to challenging our own ideas and our own preconceptions. And then finally, and crucially, they're systemic in their nature. So the ideas and initiatives that we're developing through these processes aspire to be systemic. And that means we're coming up with solutions that go beyond dealing with a part of the whole or the symptoms of the problem. They're really looking at what's the root cause of that problem. Why aren't things working in the first place? So this is what Nesta call their innovation spiral. We're doing a lot of work with Nesta, who are the UK's innovation lab kind of think tank. They've been very supportive of us, and they developed this spiral with these stages of an innovation lab process, which starts with your opportunities and challenges. What is the challenge? What's the issue? What's the barrier? And where are the opportunities? And then we go through a process of working with those stakeholders to generate ideas. What are some ideas to address those challenges? We go through a period of developing and testing, prototyping those ideas, supporting the participants to implement them, making a case for them so that we can look towards delivering and implementing, and eventually rolling out and scaling up, and then starting to see systems change. Fundamental to the thinking within the kind of ethos within an innovation lab process is design thinking. And design thinking essentially is, it focuses on human beings from the outset. So instead of viewing problems solely from an organization's resource perspective or the system perspective, we view it from the experience perspective, so the experience of the stakeholders. So if, for example, we're developing a climate action plan, and that climate action plan is going to be rolled out across a community, we want to understand the implications of that on and for all the stakeholders. So the stakeholders include those who are implementing that plan, developing it, and those who are going to be impacted by that plan. And that's really important, particularly when you're thinking about a just transition to net zero. And this links to the other kind of fundamental aspect of innovation labs, of design thinking, and it's co-creation. And as I said, that's kind of my background, and that really is the fundamental ethos. It's the central tenet to innovation labs, and for me, to developing effective solutions. So co-creation essentially is a form of open participatory kind of policy or strategy development, where those, as I said, who are implicated by the outcome are engaged in the process. It draws on this range of perspectives and it blends those ideas. So you have facilitators there to support that dialogue. It's about enabling a dialogue, enabling a safe space, creating a safe space where everybody's on an equal kind of playing field in order to develop effective and realistic and feasible solutions. So very quickly, co-creation done well, you should see effective policy strategies, plans, projects that are actually fit for purpose. You know, they've been developed with that range of stakeholders, so they serve the problem. Well-informed decisions are made, real needs and problems are addressed, the real needs and problems of the community or whoever it is that you are dealing with. And also a sense of ownership. If the community and the council have worked together to address these issues, there'll be a sense of ownership and a better understanding of each other. And so we see these changed relationships, and it was fascinating listening to Debbie and Sue and Carlos talk about what's happening in Camden. Those relationships are so important. You know, we are in a climate emergency and we are not going to be able to do this alone. We are absolutely reliant on working together. So anything that we can do to break down some of those traditional kind of barriers and boundaries between, particularly between councils and the wider community. And that then, of course, leads to social cohesion, successful implementation and lasting change. So I'm going to talk to you quickly about the lab that we're running at the moment. So we're working with councils across Staffordshire. We were approached by Keele University. We've done a lot of work with Keele University in the past, and they came to us and said, we've got this request from Staffordshire, can you help us with it? And Staffordshire wanted us to facilitate a process with, it says 9 there, we've actually got the 10 key councils on board now, to improve their understanding of the principles of Zero Carbon Britain, to explore what the key barriers are to reaching net zero, to understand the needs of the councils in their journey to net zero, to determine appropriate governance for climate emergency work across all the councils, to support the councils in that journey to net zero and ensure that they have all the tools they need to take on that journey, and to ensure effective collaboration and resource sharing that can go into the future beyond the process, beyond the time that we're with them. Now, the goal they've come up with is to work better together to address the climate and ecological crisis. And I'm going to come back to that towards the end. I just want to take you very quickly through the process that we're working, that we're running with them. And just to say, we're partway through that process. So we haven't got final results yet, but it's an evolving process. So here's the councils we're working with. We're covering the whole of the county, but we're working at county, borough, district, city level. We've got approximately 32 participants that are turning up regularly to the workshops we're running. And you'll see here they cover quite a wide range of roles. We've got everything from elected members through to CEOs, through to officers. Has been quite a heavy focus on officers with environment or sustainability in their title, and I'll come back to that in a little bit as well. And we're doing what the tool that we're using is the Three Horizons approach. And if you're not familiar with the Three Horizons approach, it's basically, it's a very simple, it's a very intuitive tool for thinking about the future and mapping out our journey to the future. And it helps groups explore systemic patterns in order to identify which are the dominant patterns that are no longer fit for use, that are preventing us getting to net zero. And then it helps us kind of explore what visionary action, what collaborative action is needed on that journey in order to get us to net zero. And very simply, you've got these three horizons that you can see there in this figure. This was developed by Bill Sharp. It's being used very widely with a lot of councils, a lot of organizations now. And what I like about it is actually the simplicity of it. So basically, Horizon 1 is business as usual. That is essentially where we are now. This is what would happen if we stayed with our current systems, with our current practices. That is business as usual. And you can see that kind of dips down. Horizon 3, jumping to Horizon 3, that is our vision of a viable net zero future. That's where we want to get to. And Horizon 2 are the measures, the innovations that it's going to take to get to net zero. So what we do with the participants in the workshops is we map out these three horizons. This is all being done online at the moment, which has been interesting. Added a few slight technical kind of complications, but we've managed it and they've done amazingly. We encourage them to use these structures, these themes that you can see on the right hand side here, just to help them with their thinking, to provide a kind of framework. So we've got social, technological, environmental, economic, political, then we've got communication and collaboration and values and mindsets. And there, I'm going to come back to the significance of them in a minute, but at the moment, what it enables them to do is think about, for example, on that Horizon 1, what are the social barriers to reaching net zero? What are the technological, the environmental, the economic, the political? What are the communication and collaboration issues at the moment? What's stopping us working better together? And what are the values and mindsets that are stopping us from getting to net zero? Online, we're using Mural. This is what it started to look like. So these are the new online equivalent of Post-it notes. And this is where the participants have literally responded to that framework and they've mapped out the barriers. The vision for the future that they want is in green there, and the ways in which they might get there is on the blue Post-it notes. And we take all that away. We had hundreds of online Post-it notes. We take all that away, combine it. It goes, we analyze it and we bring it back to them. And then what we focus on next is those blue Post-its, what we call the opportunities and enablers. An opportunity is something that there's a desire for and a momentum. So that can be kind of linked to or related to existing actions and innovations. The opportunity is there. An enabler is something that might make that opportunity happen. So for example, you might have a pot of funding and that will enable you to make that opportunity happen. What we've done here, we went through a long process of exploring the opportunities and enablers and literally linking them to Horizon 1 and Horizon 3. How would this opportunity help us get from business as usual now through to the vision that we've mapped out together? Then what we do is we group, this is, sorry, you can't see anything on here, but it's just to give you a sense. If you could see more closely these post-its, what you'd see is we've grouped these, and some of them are all about infrastructure, some of them are all about land use, some of them are about beliefs and mindsets and values. And we call this a leverage spectrum. And I'll just show you the next slide quickly. So when we're coming up with ideas, opportunities and enablers in order to help us get to net zero, ultimately we want to implement the solutions that are going to have the biggest leverage, that are going to have the biggest impact. But very often what we find is they're the ones that are the hardest to implement. They might be the most expensive. They might be the most challenging. So down to at the left-hand end there where it says system, this is where you've got the least leverage. But very often what you'll find at that end is you've got the interventions that might be easiest to implement, what we might think of as the low-hanging fruit. And these shouldn't be dismissed. They're an important part of the process because sometimes they're just the quick fixes that we can implement cheaply and quickly to get that motivation, to get attention, to get the public engaged, for example. Moving up the spectrum, what you'll very often find, if I go back to my previous slide, those post-its at the far right-hand end predominantly are about beliefs and mindsets. What changes are going to be needed to be made to people's beliefs, values and mindsets in order to get to net zero. Harder to implement, but ultimately will have the most leverage, will have the most impact. And when we're working with the council, typically we'll say, let's not ignore the low-hanging fruit. Let's act on that quickly. It's something we can do quickly now, but in the long term, we need to be thinking about the beliefs and mindsets. So the next step that we go through in the process is stakeholder mapping. I love this bit for many reasons, primarily because this is often, particularly with some councils who are doing less public engagement, where the penny really drops and there's a kind of, oh my God moment. There's a lot of people to be considered in this process. So what we do here is we map out the key stakeholder groups that they need to be able to reach their goal, to get to net zero. So we ask some questions like, who are the groups working in the system at the moment? Given your goal, whose perspectives do we really need to understand? Who's got influence over that? Who's got power? Who's going to be impacted by that goal? We want to know, are they critical in changing the system? Are they critical to you meeting your goal? If you don't engage these people, will you be able to meet your goal? And if the answer is no, then you know you absolutely need to engage them. Added to this is this idea of how strongly or weakly aligned they are to your goal. And that's important to know in terms of the type and the level of engagement you might need to think about doing. So for example, so you put, I don't know how well you can see this, but we've got a key there, and we've been, this is quite early stages, so it's a bit messy, but we've been drawing different coloured lines between those stakeholders and the council's central goal. And essentially, if they're strongly aligned, they have a deep commitment to your goal. They're on board. They're on a par with you. If they're weakly aligned, they might sometimes help. They might do a little bit. This might be because they don't realise that the council need their support, or vice versa. They might be disconnected, and so these stakeholders do nothing for the goal, even though they're an important part of the system. And this might be because they don't know that their support is needed, or they believe that you don't need their support, or the council doesn't need their support, or they have their own goal, and it doesn't directly relate to this overarching goal. And then finally, they might actually be conflicting, and these stakeholders are making decisions that actually actively make it more difficult for us to achieve our goal of getting to net zero. So they're in direct conflict with what we're doing. And just quickly, you know, when you're thinking about who you need to be engaging with, the ones who are conflicting are as important as the ones who are on board, because they can scupper your process, basically. So, this is just an example of some software that we're using. We're using something called Kumu. It's a really nice piece of software. It's evolving all the time, but it's enabling us to digitally map our stakeholders. And this, we're supporting the councils in Staffordshire. They will own this at the end of it, and they'll be able to keep adding to it. You can map relationships between the stakeholders. You can map who's doing what, who's responsible for what areas, etc., etc. So that's a very quick overview of the process that we're going through. As I say, we're in the middle of it with Staffordshire. The next stages will be really developing those opportunities and enablers into actions, and seeing who they need to be working with to implement those actions. But I just wanted to finish by sharing a few observations with you, and that have come out of this process, and to recognise and acknowledge that this process is coming about it from a very different angle to say what Debbie has just described. This was a group of councils that didn't understand why they needed to do any community engagement, that believe they need to do this alone first. There's been a comment made several times about we need to get our own house in order first before we expect others to. Now, that's not the position we take at CAP, but we also know that, as I'm sure you will have come across, all of you, there are certain behaviours, certain mindsets that going along and just bashing them repeatedly won't make any difference at all. You need to work with those mindsets. So we've provided that space for them to explore what needs doing. And I said earlier, you get this kind of aha moment. And I think what they went through first is a feeling of being completely overwhelmed. This recognition that, my God, this journey to net zero is huge. It's scary. It's daunting. It's really complex. And then out of that, a recognition that, and we can't do it alone. So rather than us telling them, you've got to work with your local community, they actually worked that out for themselves. They realized there's no way they could get to net zero. One, within their individual silos within their councils. So what they've come to is, actually, we need to work across our council. We need to work across the county, between the councils. We need to work across the county with our wider stakeholders, with other public sector bodies, with businesses, with community groups. And I loved what you were saying, Debbie, about the way that your councillors and officers have organically kind of come together and realised that. I love it. This wasn't going to happen in this situation because they just weren't even at that point of going out into the wider community. They've worked it out for themselves, just coming from a different angle. And that's it. I mean, we've been in a very fortunate position. We've been able to go in as a relatively independent body and work with these councils. Not everybody is able to do that. I recognise that. So this is just presenting another process, another method. I think that recognising, as I said, all councils are different, and we're going to need different processes across the country, and different things work for different people. And that is it, I think, for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. That was fascinating. And it's really, it's really nice to hear that. Like I put in the chat that the Three Horizons model is something that really inspired the visioning exercise that we've created, and the stakeholder thing is very much similar to the big list exercise that we use. So it's like these tools have different names, but the fact that we're seeing a lot of this adoption of the same sorts of methods, I think is really, really good. And also for me, what you were saying about the recognition, even within councils who may be, feeling that they're, it's more of a barrier for them engaging, but actually recognizing that there needs to be a change and that we can't do this, we can't address these big issues on our own as a transition group or as a council, and the recognition that people are starting to go, we do need to work together, I think opens up a whole world of possibility, not just around climate change, but around other stuff like participatory democracy and budgeting and things like that. If we can start to build those relationships and it not be a us versus them, it's like sometimes it feels like quite a lot, but if it can be a us and us situation, that is obviously much better.
So the question I asked was, one of the principles of good co-production, good collaboration, is that's sharing of value of experts. So everyone in the room is an expert. So as community members, I'd like to reframe the question slightly different. Do we understand as community members, as transitioners, what expertise it is we're bringing and the value of that? We talked a little bit about the fact that we bring connections in the community, which council officers sometimes don't have, or often don't have. They don't live in the community. And we also talked about the power of convening, that we are conveners, and that we can, not that we just have those connections, but we can bring people together in a way that, if you get an invitation from a council officer, it's not nearly as compelling as an invitation from Debbie from Transition Town. So,
or Pom here from Transition, my group as well.
Pom, yeah. Hi, Pom.
So Anna, you had some thoughts on that, and then maybe open it up to if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
I did. I mean, the question has changed slightly, but I will just share a few thoughts. I mean, as I think I said in my presentation, for me, it's really important that kind of the fundamental principle of a collaborative process is that everyone is the expert. And I think that we very much live in a society where we separate experts into this little kind of bubble that is kind of way above the rest of us minions. And there's some work I do, particularly with the master's students at CAT, around decision making and engagement, and talk about traditional decision making and what's wrong with it. And what's wrong with traditional decision making is that generally traditional decision making is made by the little bubble of experts that are very often very removed from the people that decision is going to impact on, or it's made by kind of popular vote, So it's these decisions are being made in these kind of isolated spaces, and they're not very realistic. And I think that we grow up with this notion of what an expert is, but forgetting that actually every single one of us is an expert in our own field. And that spectrum of expertise is enormous. And very often those experts, the ones we label an expert, have no idea what most of our day-to-day life is like, that their strategies and their decisions are going to impact on. So how can they possibly come up with the solutions to fix that? If you haven't come across Rebecca Willis, she does some really fascinating work around this. She does a lot of stuff around participatory democracy. She's got a book out relatively recently. It's very accessible, called Too Hot to Handle. I'm just trying to see if I've got it. Yes, I have, just to make sure I got that right. Too Hot to Handle. Really, really good. All about participatory democracy. She's got this term called cockpitism, about kind of relating that notion that one person can control everything. So what I would say, the conversation we were having just now was, for me, citizens' assemblies is a little bit reflective of this. I find them a little bit problematic in terms of, again, they're separating the public from the experts, from the decision makers. They're isolating those three bodies. And what I want to see is bringing all of those people together. and treating them all as experts. I want the decision makers to hear the views, the opinions, and the experiences of the people that those decisions are going to impact on.
Thank you, Anna. John Laker, was your question directly related to this, or I was just going to open the floor for any responses and then maybe come to you? But I'm not sure. What is your question directly related, or is it a separate question?
It was a comment.
Yes, carry on then, John.
Okay, well, first, can I apologise for coming late?
No problem.
There was a great difficulty in attending 4 meetings at the same time.
Have you done all 4?
Well, I've been to one of them and then come on to this one because I'm interested in all 4 and I'm missing bits of all of them. But that's my problem at the moment. Yes, what I wanted to contribute was that I'm involved in an organisation called Marlow Energy Group, Marlow in South Buckinghamshire. We're trying to get Marlow to be a zero carbon town. Now, the 2 routes that we look at with great enthusiasm, if that's the right word, is through organisations like organisations ending in CAN, Climate Action Networks. We've got Marlow CAN, we've got Bucks Climate Action Alliance, and if you want to see a really good one, better than those 2, it's Reading CAN. Now, Reading CAN has the huge advantage of not only having just environmentalists on it, it has people from the Environment Agency, businesses, NHS, one councillor, one Reading Borough councillor, and many other people on it. And it presents reports to Reading Council. And Reading Council take note of them. They don't do all of them, but they do some of them. So they're getting professional advice from a group from the outside coming in to the council direct. The other entry area is through the officer or officers of the council. In Marlow, we have a unitary authority called Buckinghamshire Council. Buckinghamshire Council are huge because they're the county, but they do have a remarkably good environmentally friendly officer in that position. And we can go through him and say, can you put this to the councillors? He may do it, he may not. But that is a very good avenue in. In Marlow Town Council, which is a small parish council, we also have someone now employed as the environmental officer who we go through and say, can you put this to the council? So there are avenues. I mean, I agree with, I think it was it Anna, or yes, Anna, that citizens groups are not particularly good for anything because whatever they come up with, the councils can totally ignore it.
That's great, John. Just one very quick question: who holds the Climate Action Network? How did that emerge?
A lot of organisations in and around Buckinghamshire sort of all got together. They did the sort of network of shall we do this, and they gradually put it together so that almost every environmental group in Buckinghamshire is involved in this particular area. In my honest opinion, it's not a particularly positive thing at the moment because it's going very aggressively at the current councillors and trying to de-seat some of the top councillors by sending out a pledge and saying if your Conservative councillors don't sign this, vote for someone else. I think that's getting a bit too political personally. I think we wait till the council's actually elected and then put pressure on them one way or the other. But to try and elect people now just gives me the impression that if you actually manage to succeed to do that, you create a lot of enemies.
Interesting point, yeah. John Webb, I see you've got your hand up. Are you? Yeah, great.
Yes, here I am. I was very much encouraged by Ruth in our group, who described a startup situation and all the stickiness of that. But I pointed out that anyone thinking of starting a group, indeed perhaps attempting to do so for years, can call on any mature groups, especially those around them, who have signed up as they become recognized by the Transition Network core as established groups, to help out in just that situation. So a new group with 1.5 people can pretend to be a small army if need be, with support from these others and a little raid of their archives and a bit updating of whatever. But actually, Ruth had a fearsome pamphlet there to be handed out as soon as things de-restrict a bit. So I just wanted to mention that in passing because it may apply to other participants of this one. I wanted also, if I may, Michael, to say our experience, we worked differently about this, which was to plug away at the powers that be, and we've got a slightly strange structure with an extra authority here, and getting fed up with them and then getting fed up with us and nothing much happening until they declared a climate emergency. Not realizing, of course, this would provide a hook for us to sort of engage with them. But it wasn't us, it was Extinction Rebellion suddenly popped up and got in there, wanting to just disrupt council meetings and the due process. So as a defensive organism, the council came up with a cabinet panel for the environment in order to hold these activists at bay. And this got off to a flying start, but then Extinction Rebellion got fed up with nothing much happening, not really, because a cabinet panel has no power, only a cabinet does. But we've stuck in there, and now this week, for the first time, we were in on a cabinet meeting and treated, not so much as experts, as we all had our own capabilities and experience and assets, and we really had a constructive session, because we're doing projects, they've got funds, they're doing things, let's zip them all together and take stock of where we're making real progress. So I think things have moved on in using the ordinary routes, but with the impetus of climate emergency, Extinction Rebellion, and then we found that actually this fed into our efforts as a transition town group. That's it.
Thank you, John. Has anyone else in the groups here had experience of climate emergencies or want to comment on that? Harriet?
Sorry, no, I wasn't going to comment on. I mean, I can say that.
No,
yes.
Carry on with what you want to say.
What I was going to say is that, as I said to our breakout group, I feel as though I'm from Poole in Dorset, and nowadays I'm from a place called BCP, which is Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, because they amalgamated 3 towns into one local authority, which is now the 10th largest in the UK. And in the last 10 years, as a transition group, we've kind of gone from the situation in Camden, where it was fantastic and fun, and we were interacting with the council and interacting with the officers and setting up things together, and everyone was working in partnership, to more like the Staffordshire now, where it's kind of gone into this, it's very Tory-led, very glass and steel innovation, very, it's very, no, we haven't got time for climate and nature and green spaces. We're building business, we're economic growth, so it's like a completely new starting point to get back to where we were. So I'm just, I'm not quite sure where we're going to go with this, but I think that the partnership working is key. and introducing the idea to the leadership, the current leadership of the council, that they need our help. They need the help of the people who live here. So that was just kind of what I wanted to say about what I'm dealing with.
Thanks, Harriet. Anyone else want to have a different question, want to comment on that? John, you've already been, so I'm looking for other people first, but I will come back to you if no one else puts their hand up. Come on, people, I'm sure you've got stuff to say.
I just want to say also, it's interesting about the Tory thing coming into it, because I know in Tooting, Hillary's got Tory, and it's hard to get traction. It's a really tricky and interesting point, that really. We need to crack it as a whole transition network, really, because it's all very well us in Camden with Labour, gung-ho.
Have any of you worked with the Conservative, I think they're called the Conservative Environmental Network? That's something that's been kind of presented to me recently that we're looking into at the moment. But again, like others have said, it's about finding a way in, isn't it? And understanding their position. Where are they coming from? So how can we get best traction?
Interesting. At the Kate Railworth talk the other week, the transition talk, a thing came up and it stuck on me. It was like, where isn't the energy in the room? You know, it's all, we're all here, but who isn't here? And in this session, I would now, the word Tories come to mind. I mean, I've written to some of the Tory council. I don't get anywhere, you know, in the most positive, glowing way, trying to include them. But just as a matter of principle, it's a no. We need, as a network, to be thinking about this.
Yeah, I think bridging that, for me, one of the biggest forms of polarization in a way in the country at the moment is that split. And it's how do you bridge different political divides, let alone different aspects of your community. I'm just going to go to Rachel, then Dermot, and then I come to John. So Rachel.
Yeah, no, just on that point, because actually that is being used to divide us, isn't it? And as a distractor, like you were talking about, Anna. And I'm in Torquay, which is, well, actually we did have a Liberal Democrat MP for ages, but it's very conservative, the small C, and quite an elderly population, and and we tried to start a transition town 15 years ago and just didn't really get anywhere. But I mean, actually partly also because Totnes were like, no, you can't, it's too soon. But so I kind of got disheartened and went off and did other things. And actually coming back to this, there's loads of stuff that is happening here now. But interestingly, it's not, I don't think it's a transition town. I'm only just looking into it, but they've done something called Torbay Spark or Torquay Spark, and they're doing Dragon's Dens and stuff, which seems like quite an interesting tilt. You know, if you just make it about innovation, then the Tories can get on board and they're more comfortable with it, about job creation. And so, yeah, that's been quite inspiring to see that there are ways we can try and move forward.
Thank you, Rachel. Dermot?
Yeah, so in Tooting, I just wanted to speak really briefly about that. So there's a side issue on that also, that the Labour councillors are often don't want to collaborate with the Tory councillors either. So if we get them on side and then you're saying, well, can we bring these other people in? They go, well, no, they're Tories. And think, well, that doesn't really matter to us. So that's a bit of an issue. But we've got a few intransigent, stuck in the mud councillors who just don't want to do anything, and we get various flickering and modulating engagement from the Labour councillors. So it's not all great in Tooting by any ways, but I just wanted to add that in as a more nuanced picture.
Thanks, Dermot. I mean, the one thing that has happened in like Frome is that people just stood as independents and took over their town council, and literally did unseat pretty much everyone in it, and then and that did enable them to do quite a bit of stuff, even though the budgets, the access to resource and power at town council level is very different to, as you move up the food chain, for want of a better word. Just before I come to you, John, just one thing that sprang to mind from what my experience has been of being sort of a bit politically active in Bristol, is that councils are so under the cosh from central government austerity cuts, and we're very likely to see another round of that if they feel like they can get away with it. Central government can get away with it. So they are like and social care in particular being such a high cost thing at the moment. I can understand why some councils are just like, oh my God, we just got so much to deal with, to have to think about all this other stuff, which they and I think a lot of them do realize it's important, but they're literally reacting to what their own crises. So it is a systemic problem. I mean, I think it's, we live in almost a traumatized system at the moment, which isn't fit for purpose. So in order for us to get in or have more engagement, I think it's very difficult when there's, they're consistently being cut, having their budgets cut. I mean, the reduction in budget in Bristol has been absolutely huge over the last 11 years now. Well, since the financial crash, they have seen huge reductions in their resource. So I think that is a real challenge across the board for everything that we're trying to do and for them. And I wonder whether thinking about how does what we do help to support them to deal with that might be quite an interesting way in. Not that we should necessarily be papering over cracks. I also think we should be demanding that this austerity isn't happening as well. But I think that's an interesting thing to consider. John, come to you.
Yeah, I just want to sympathise with Harriet and her situation and say it could be worse. You could be in Buckinghamshire. We are in a situation here where 75% of the councillors are Conservative, and in May, approximately 75% of the councillors will be Conservative. About 6 months ago, they passed a motion on the climate emergency saying Buckinghamshire Council will be net zero by 2050.
Does anyone have any more questions or stuff they'd like to ask the panel, or just everyone?
I wanted to comment on what Dermot was saying and what you were just saying as well about what value, what communities can bring to help councils. And I think at the moment this polarisation issue is really important, but actually we can be quite guilty of that as well. So the low traffic neighbourhoods thing has really sparked, been a big thing in Wandsworth. And there's that one Wandsworth organisation which is revolting, but we can't just, somehow we've got to find a way to have a more nuanced discussion. That word nuance does seem really important, and that would be helpful, I think, for council officers and councillors.
Harriet and then John, and then we may have to begin to think about winding up.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, I brought up the notion that it was something to do with Tories, and I'd like to say that I think, agreeing with Sue there, that this the divisiveness that comes from the party political system is something that I'd like to get away from, and I don't normally bring up party politics when I speak to people for that reason. And I think it is very divisive, and it causes a lot more problems than it solves. So I think we have to be careful about how we address that problem, particularly in transition, because transition, we're definitely apolitical, aren't we?
So we're going to be in John, Rachel, Pamela, and then Nicola, and then that'll probably be it. John, can we keep it brief? Oh, you're muted, John.
I'm clear now. Be careful what you wish for. We came up with an all-independent town council, cleared the boards, and it was worse than useless, disastrous, in fact. And we finally got it shut down. But we can, to respond to a couple of people, including Debbie, Yes, transition is politically neutral, but you can't ignore the world containing politics. Now, we've been very fortunate to have a change of regime from conservative dominated to a lib-lab pact, but a bit close to the border with elections coming up. And it's changed the atmosphere completely, including getting the benefit of competent conservative councillors who are well respected by all parties, and the system is now functioning much better. So we're in a fortunate time on that score, but maybe it can't last. What they want to hear is low-cost projects, and that's the sort of thing we can do, because we can make money go a long way. We can point to resources and so on and ideas, and above all, we want them not to have another consultation, the fourth one it would be, on let's have a cycling and walking network. No, we've done that. We've ridden all the routes. We are cyclists. Adopt ours, for goodness sake. So if you can find a way, you can save them money, save them from themselves and the usual way of doing things, then they'll bite your arm off. We haven't got there yet, I should say. It's still a struggle. All the best now. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, John. Rachel?
Well, something that's come up for me through this last few weeks, and I think it kind of hits in with talking to councillors as well, is how do we have conversations where people don't just come with their agenda about what they want to say and like their idea? And I imagine that, you know, in a formal meeting, that's critical, isn't it, the agenda? But actually, how can we move beyond that so we can really co-create? Any ideas?
Very good question. Nicola? You're muted.
Well, happily, that builds directly off what Rachel just said. And, you know, what Harriet was bringing about different political partisan, you know, coming with my party's mindset. And one of the reasons I wanted to be here today is because I'm involved in the Municipalities in Transition project, which mainly works in countries that aren't the UK at the moment. But I think some really similar ways of working that Anna was describing from Zero Carbon Britain, of kind of mapping leverage points and, you know, focus on collaboration. And, you know, I think one of the things they really try to do, and it's one of the things that transition groups, you know, we have ideas and things, processes to do this, is getting people together, but in a way that really asks them to come as a human being. You to tap into, you are yourself a member of this community. You are a human being with your own hopes and dreams for what a world could be like. And to get, you know, it doesn't happen overnight, but to get those participants to really start to come and tap into, you know, imagination processes are great for that, aren't they? Tap into coming as a human being rather than as, I've got this agenda to bring and that's that, or I've got this party line to stick to and that's that. And yeah, I think the more we can do that, that is actually probably the way to get these different people to step out of their partisan boxes and collaborate properly together.
Thanks, Nicola. Pamela?
Yeah, picking up on those points, and particularly, was it Harriet, about how the oppositional model is just so pervasive, and in, you know, for many of us working in the environment, our experience has been challenging and campaigning, and while this is not the transition model, you know, it's a challenge to overcome that within, you know, within the communities that we're working in. But I think transition does have this culture and practices for co-working, for respecting individual contributions, for taking care of each other as well, that we can actually bring to local situations, and actually, you know, approach local councils and say, let's work together. And maybe just try doing that instead of bemoaning the fact that, you know, Labour won't work with the Greens and won't work with the Tories, and we can go in there and we can start that process and see if it's influential. And the other thing that has been bubbling through my mind during this conversation is, how do we avoid being a fig leaf? Because the other thing is that when councils and big business as well discovers that in fact we can help them deliver on environmental commitments that they're now being expected to have, we get invited to do a number of things, and question mark sometimes is, are we just being a fig leaf for them actually using us to indicate they may be doing something? And I think maybe, Debbie, you might know what I'm thinking about down at King's Cross when COP is happening up in Edinburgh. Large-scale developer has asked us to go and have a presence down there, which is great, and we can certainly use that space. But how much are we actually letting them off the hook of doing something more fundamental that they should be doing themselves as well? So how can we actually take those opportunities, but make sure that we actually hold them to account, or whatever a more constructive way of doing that is. So it's having that sort of dual role as well, which is not easy, but it's quite a good place to have actually arrived at, I think, definitely.
Thank you, Pamela. Harriet, can you make it very quick, and then we're going to have to wind up.
I wanted to pick up on the Keele University connection, and I wondered, you know, when Anna says that the initiative came from Keele, how did that happen? You know, was it somebody at Keele University suddenly said, oh, it's a good idea to do this?
I'm on mute. I'm not. Keele have a very good, they have some really good relationships across the county, and we have a connection with Keele. And Keele have a commitment. They see that they have a commitment, a responsibility within the county to kind of share good practice, share their knowledge, share their expertise. So they have an existing relationship with a lot of the councils in Staffordshire. They have an existing relationship with us. Staffordshire councils had all declared a climate emergency, and as with many other councils, were then faced with the, well, what do we do now question. And Keele also have periodically have access to pots of funding. So it was a kind of perfect storm of all of that, really, that brought us all together. Keele have really taken that responsibility very seriously, I think, in terms of, you know, and that's just in itself is interesting in terms of that stakeholder, you know, working with other organisations in your area. They take that responsibility very seriously, that they feel they have a responsibility to support their wider community.